learn, change, grow.
Hello, Unlearners, and welcome to this episode of the Unlearners podcast with myself, Zanele Njapa, the Unlearning Lady. And today I've got an amazing guest for you that I'm going to introduce in a minute. But thank you so much for taking the time to reimagine or rethink learning and education with us as part of our theme of season 4 of the Unlearners podcast, talking all things education, teaching, learning, brain development, all sorts of things that help you and I to understand, regardless of where we fall in the ecosystem or whatever stakeholders we are within the education space and fraternity, how do we step in and play our role independently, but also together, which is probably more important than what we can do independently. So what I am going to introduce to you today is our conversation that I have been waiting for a while to have. And Katy, I'm going to introduce you just now, but just to give you some context, I have been setting up for this discussion in little bits throughout different episodes. And one of the things that I've been saying is that our education has so much space for us to teach how to learn. And what you end up seeing is a focus on what to learn rather than how to learn, not teaching the skill of learning and the capacity to learn and to challenge and to grow rather than, actual specific content. And what you and I are going to maybe touch on today, obedience, because we have seen this consistent theme within whether we're talking the early childhood development space or we're talking just at those primary school ages, your high school or secondary phases, or later on within tertiary education of different kinds, a postgrad or just undergrad. There is this theme of obedience and learning what to consume rather than maybe the skill of teaching thinking and teaching learning. So the guest that is going to help us to unpack this and think about some of the practical ways that you and I can play a role within shifting this within education, regardless of where we are and where we find ourselves in the world, is none other than someone I have the privilege and honor of calling my friend, Katy Mthetwa. So Katy is the CEO at Thrive Together. And Katy, when I've welcomed you, I'd like you to tell us a little bit more about what you do at Thrive Together. So welcome to the Unlearners podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Zanele. At last, we're here.
Yay! I know. I've been waiting forever for this. So tell me a little bit more about Thrive Together. Where does that concept come from? And then also, what are some of the things that you do?
Fantastic. So, Thrive Together, it was born out of a diversity, equity, and inclusion curriculum that I was asked to write and teach at St. Peter's Boys' School in Joburg. And we saw mindsets changing through the material as we unpacked it. And so that was so exciting. Colleagues kept saying, you've got to get this curriculum into other schools. And we made the big semigration from Joburg down to Durban. And in that space, I decided not to get another teacher in post, but to try and get this curriculum into schools so that we could help students really start thinking about how we create belonging for everyone, and how we can change our mindsets in terms of how we think about those around us.
Oh, there's so much there. There's such a, and we could almost shift our conversation. And I think there's definite alignment here. We can almost shift our conversation, Katy, to speaking more specifically to the work that you actually do and what the focus is. And what I want to start it off with, if you're comfortable, is that story you once told, that when you shared it, it completely blew my mind around the experience with your daughter in the car and how that was such a shift for you. You mentioned it as part of your Speaker Factor speech, and how that was an experience for you that helped you to shift, but also to understand some of the key intricacies of how we learn, but also how we learn informs the lenses through which we view society. And I want to use that as a kind of anchor for the conversation of, okay, so what conversations should we be having in our classrooms that help equip our learners to be better human beings almost? So whichever story you're comfortable to tell, no pressure at all.
I think you mixed two stories there. There's the car. So I often start a workshop by saying how Tony, so I married Tony Mthetwa. He's a Zulu man. And we can arrive at a gated estate, and the security guard will ask him through the window, "Oh, are you dropping her off?" And at which he's like, "Wasn't planning to, and so the assumption is being made that he's my Uber driver. And then the one about my daughter was having a tantrum in the shopping mall. Bless her heart, she that's the one you remember. And shame, she was being a 4-year-old, and a lady came up to comfort me with the words, "Oh, shame, have you adopted them?" And this idea that because my kids don't look like me, that I must have adopted them, and that this what it tells me is that our mindsets, although we are post-apartheid, we are post-colonization, the mindsets still are so full of that legacy that we've got to disrupt um, our natural ways of thinking about the world around us that have been so informed by our past.
And with the work that you do, Katie, maybe using that then as a springboard, what have you found are some of the gaps? Are we teaching in such a way that we are creating those types of mindsets that are a lot more agile and flexible with the way we view others, with the way we view ourselves as a part of society? What are some of the gaps there?
It's fascinating. I think one of the big things for me is that we see the world through our perspective, through our
Mm.
lens, through our life experience. And so, unless we interrupt that with considering another lens as being as equally valid as our own, which means that we no longer can think that we're right about everything, which causes discomfort. Unless we're prepared to do that, then we're only ever going to see the world in this kind of one-dimensional way, where everything that I've been told in history is what's in front of me. And when everyone's history is shaped differently. So I love one example. A child coming out of a workshop said, "I used to believe that all it took to get out of poverty was hard work. Now I realize that just by being born into poverty creates hard work." Now, if we just take that if a student can start to see the world around them through a lens of realizing that they've just taken on beliefs that aren't based in any fact, then we can really start unlearning all that we didn't realize we learned and start intentionally learning something different and questioning the world in a different way.
So what does that look like then? That story gave me goosebumps, just so you know. Wow. I think that that's the realization that hits so many of us. I mean, at different ages, and it might be a recurring here and there at different points where you realize that there has almost been a meshing of socialization and conditioning with you, where you've gotten to a place where you don't quite know how to separate. And it's like, okay, so I think I want to get married, but is that because I actually want it or because I was told or conditioned to want it? And I think that that is such a pivotal thing. And I think it's perfectly attuned to this conversation, because if we are teaching children to think, then we are giving them the tools and the capacity to be able to differentiate and to find their voices and to go, "Oh, that's not me. Ah, I see where that comes from." So talk to me about what that looks like then. What do you think are some of the starting points of that? And then we're going to talk about the practicalities then of a curriculum that supports that. But where does it start in essence?
So I think that we need to go back to how we teach something. So you were saying earlier about obedience, right at the start there. So in obedience, and I think that's what traditional classrooms were. I tell you what you must think, I tell you what you must believe, I tell you what you must know, and even give you my history in the way that is um, maybe we'll consider different points of view or different sources of evidence, but not necessarily validating that they're both like of equal weight, or like often there's a slight bias in the evidence. And so I mean we as a teacher you hear kids, saying, but miss, can I do it like this? Can I do it like that? Can I? Because there's this sense that there's a way you want me to do it. There is a right and a wrong answer, or there's a, which sometimes there is in maths, but there's a right and a wrong answer. There's a right and a wrong way to draw whatever it is you've asked me to draw. And so what does it look like for us to say, okay, it's more important here that we learn. It's more important here that we question. And so two thoughts come to mind. One is a beautiful quote that I can't remember who it was by, but I've lived by that philosophy ever since, which is that the principle that you cannot push something into someone's brain, it has to be pulled in. And so for me, we need to just create again and again contexts and environments, activities where students can then pull in the learning. Or a learning. Let's not say that there's one, right? There's a learning, and everyone's learning from a context, from a situation might be slightly different. Again, the perspectives that they bring to it. And the other, I had the privilege of being a founder member of Thinking School South Africa. And in that journey, just having my world opened to so many different thinking tools, so that we are less about rote learning and we are just immerse ourselves in different practical ways to elicit children's thinking, make their thinking visible so that they can question. It's hard to change something when you don't know what it is that you're trying to change. So I was thinking about this morning, that there are things for me that I know I'm trying to change, but unless I can articulate what it is, give it a name, and then be intentional about it, I'm not going to bring about change. That's what you're all about, right? We've got to unlearn and relearn. And so I think in the classrooms, if we're not intentionally giving space to naming things, then we don't know what it is that we're thinking. If we can't articulate our thinking about something, it's hard to then think any differently.
And what role would you say, Katy, belonging plays in that conversation then, in the conversation that you and I are having right now, of allowing our learners to learn the thinking, or learn the capacity to think and the capacity to learn? What does belonging maybe give a sense of psychological safety that then opens the brain up to better learning? What role does belonging play there?
Yeah, definitely. So I think psychological safety is key in every classroom. And so for a child to feel like they are seen and that they belong as their authentic self. So we might find, and again, if we're not aware of it, then we wouldn't know that there's a child in our classroom who feels that there's a part of themselves that they have to leave at the school gate. Because when they come into this space, they now need to speak a certain way, they need to assimilate to certain norms. And if there's not space for them to believe something different, to have a different way of being in the space, like they're too noisy or they're too whatever, and we use the word they. But I often laugh at one of my daughters. She just has a really loud default voice, and And I can just see what happens in the classroom. I can imagine the teacher sometimes thinking, oh, this one, can we just turn them down a bit, But the reality is, what tells us as a teacher that there's a certain volume at which someone should speak? And we can go back into societal, norms. We can unpack so many things just in that conversation. But for there to be a sense that you can be you in the classroom and belong as yourself and not have to change, I just think is amazing. One child in a workshop recently, when asked what is belonging, wrote on the paper, it's fitting in even when you don't fit in. And I just thought that was the most perfect way to describe belonging. It's that you feel like you fit in even when you kind of know that you don't, or there's a part of you that doesn't. That's allowed to be there, it's allowed to be present.
That is incredible. And I mean, if we look already now, Katie, at the corporate space, there is a huge DEIB conversation, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, but it's all because we have created the case, the business case for it. So we understand the pivotal impacts and the goal or the rewards of integrating belonging. But in the classroom, I think we're still not quite there. From what I'm seeing, we're still in a space where, and we were having this discussion as one of the episodes, where it's either an inclusive classroom that isn't exactly inclusive, so inclusive education that isn't exactly inclusive, or you've got alternative education that is so alternative that it's actually very niche and limiting in and of itself. And so it is just such a big dilemma still at the moment that the education space is dealing with, is to how actually do we create that? Because like you say so brilliantly, it is that diversity. It is that, oh my goodness, fitting in even when you don't fit in, that truly allows individuals the psychological safety to then learn, but to also learn what it means to learn and to think independently and be the kinds of adults that can go into the world and challenge. You use the word challenge so beautifully as well, going into a space and challenging, because at the end of the day, that's a big part of that learning process. So is there anything that you've seen that you would say, Zanele, for me, this is the closest example of what belonging could look like in a school environment that is as progressive as what we can have right now?
Um, I'm going to use just the example of one activity that we do with the curriculum.
Mhm.
So we talk about a child's individual identity. This is in the second unit, so like term 2 of the second block of the curriculum. And we unpack a child's individual identity. And so they think about and talk about their nationality, religion and beliefs, their culture and traditions, their name, where that's from. So a whole number of aspects. And after that, we then look at collective identities. And we look at the fact that everyone within a collective is an individual. And so we can't talk about collectives ever as a whole without using some words to ensure that we're accurate in what we say. So we can't say English people are like most English people, many English people, all the English people I've met are. And by just making it truthful, using those words, some, many, most, we change the way in which we're shaping thinking. But in that individual identity activity, what's fascinated me is how children have come to understand their own identity through that. And so there's an assumption I think that I'd made until I saw this, that children kind of knew who they were. And so if children, so we're talking about grade 3 to 7 here, but if at a grade 3 level, a child is very uncertain of their ethnicity even, um, then that kind of fractured sense of self, like not knowing who you are in the world, means that you're going to not feel so psychologically safe and how and where you belong, all at a deeper level. So now, once you start talking about it, I love sharing two grade 5 boys where one said that they, coming out of this activity, that they felt safe to talk about their Hindu religion now, having had space in class to talk about it. And another boy saying that he'd never realized that anyone felt that they couldn't talk about their religion before. And so I think when we create these opportunities, we enable everyone to feel like they do belong as their authentic self, just by taking time to talk about who you are, but in a very intentional way, in a very accepting of everyone way, and being aware of pitfalls of talking about normal even, oh gosh, what is normal? Normal is a construct that changes dependent on where you are. It's just talking about a majority. But if we then talk about normal and assume that that's normal, I mean, my daughter got asked the one time, why is your hair not normal? But her hair is totally normal for first generation mixed race child, right? There's plenty of melanin and keratin in her body. So yeah, just becoming more and more aware of what we see or perceive as normal so that we can ensure that those who perhaps don't fit into the majority in a context, in a classroom, in a school environment, feel seen because we're intentional about seeing them.
I think that's brilliant, Katie. And as you were speaking, all I was thinking about is it's the potential of the exposure, that the exposure to those discussions, the exposure to those conversations has on their capacity to think. Because at the end of the day, it's not necessarily about the curriculum itself. It's about what we may call the hidden curriculum. It's about the conversations that it's about the way that you conduct and the way that the process is, I guess, executed, that then teaches a child to, and I guess we can think about thinking in and of itself as comprehension, processing, challenging information. Because when I'm sitting there and I'm going, I didn't realize that there was anyone in a room who felt uncomfortable talking about their religion, then what's happening in my brain is I'm comprehending, I'm challenging a way that I used to think, I'm processing new information. And then my brain and my entire neurology is improving as a result. And I'm also not just having that process, but I'm also learning that when I step into a brand new situation, I need to understand, I need to have that self-awareness, right? But then I also need to understand that there is something there that I may be missing. So how do I become a little bit more self-aware, but also learn to challenge? And so literally what you are doing is you are giving a child a framework that they can apply throughout different scenarios that keeps them aware, but also has them moving always into a place of greater awareness, always challenging themselves to transform here and there. But what does it look like then in a curriculum sense? If we were to put that down, how in the world? And maybe you can speak to how you're doing it already, Katie, and how you're organizing your work, how you're organizing the curriculum that you are supporting schools with, that then helps us to teach thinking as opposed to obedience.
If you've either said, this is not the way we do things, or you've heard a leader say, this is not the way we do things, then I want you to lean in, because you are exactly who we've designed the Unlearning Coaching Program for. Now, the Unlearning Coaching Program is not your regular run-of-the-mill executive and leadership coaching program. It's specifically designed for leaders who understand that unless they change the way they do things, that unless they change the way they see and lead, they are going to fall so far behind the future, it's not even funny. Now, the coaching program is designed to be integrative so that whoever signs up, whoever is a part of the program, really gets the following key features that we find make this a phenomenal opportunity. One, you get an unlearning coach that is subscribed particular to you or assigned directly to yourself. That means as you go through your journey and you apply what the program teaches, you get to have a trained professional who understands the key intricacies of an unlearning journey, shifting how you see things, especially when you're going, this is never going to work. This is the person you can share your intimate thoughts with and will help you through that journey. Two, you get to work alongside an entire group of other leaders coming from various organizations to cross-pollinate, share thoughts with, and journey through for an entire 5 months. And then very lastly, you get to learn from myself, Zanele Njapa, the Unlearning Lady, on an online platform that guides you through 5 key modules around how to build your capacity as a transformational coach or a transformational leader. And this is exactly it. And as part of the Unlearning Coaching Program, you get all 3 of those facets in one, which means by the time you finish off your 5-month learning journey or your 5-month coaching journey, you are the kind of leader that can go back into your organization, see what others don't see, perceive in ways that others don't perceive, but be able to drive the changes that your organization needs. And no longer be the person to go, no, we're not going to innovate because that's not the way we do things here. Or I don't see how that's possible. You get to be a champion of the learning that happens, of the transforming that happens in your organization.
So I think, first of all, it's creating a safe space at the beginning of every lesson where you're going to engage in these kinds of conversations. So we have journey agreements that you draw up in the class at the beginning of the year, and we remind the children of that at the beginning of each lesson, so that this is a safe space. This is what we've agreed on, and so in that, there's intentionally the decision that I'm going to be open-minded. And so I often talk about our brain, teaching kids that our brain has like an autopilot, which is to defend yourself and defend your way of thinking, defend your perspective. And so we have to teach kids that in a space where you've created, and adults, right? This is all my teacher training too. We have to, as adults too, we have to choose to override that autopilot, switch into manual for the lesson and say, I'm going to intentionally choose not to just defend myself and my position. I'm going to choose to embrace any discomfort and be prepared to think differently. And so in that journey, once you've set that up, and that's the lesson, like they know that this is what we're walking into each lesson, then we can talk more authentically about what we're really experiencing, what we're really feeling. We can open our mind to someone else's way of thinking and experiencing the world being just as valid as our own. So the curriculum, the first year we look at identity. And so being able to have language to talk about our own identity and collective identities, the identity of others, respectfully. So how can we talk about everyone and ourselves respectfully, and within that we look at minorities and majorities as well, and that impact that has. Then we, in the second year, we look at perspectives. So this is where we now look a lot more deeply at how we all have different ways of seeing the world. We look at stereotyping. We have a lot of fun, and privilege as well. I mean, that is such a fundamental lens through which we see the world. But again, that automatic response of defensiveness sometimes, if someone's like, oh no, and so how, and again, you can't, that philosophy of you can't push something into a brain. I often say, how many times have we told kids, you are so privileged, you have no idea? And does it go in? No. Because you can't push it in. And so creating activities where the realization through thinking tools, the realization that the student comes to is, oh my goodness, I have all these privileges. I didn't realize, like, I've always been told I'm privileged. Now I realize I am privileged. And just again, just finding ways for them to pull those beliefs into their own brain. And we move into then looking more intentionally at different cultures, looking at your story, my story, our story, in the fourth year. And then in the final year, we look at being the change you want to be in the world, and being able to spot even systemic bias in the world around us, being able to notice things and be like that. It's not how it actually is, or this is how the world is telling us the story, but it's not actually a truth. It's just a perspective, and maybe shaped by history and colonization and whatever that got everywhere.
I like that. It's not necessarily a truth, but it's a perspective. And maybe it is a truth for someone, or someone's truth, I guess, relative to them. And this is one of my favorite things, Katy, about what you've just said, but also about what you do, is going right back to where we started this discussion. It becomes more about the how and building almost the channels or the structure through which to process, rather than here's what you should be processing. Here is what it looks like. It's that push, right? It's the pull and the pull, the push and the pull that you were talking about earlier on. And this for me says we're creating adults, or we are grooming, and people can use different words here depending on what they're comfortable with, but we are supporting these young people so that as they go through their lives, whether they're, still young or into adulthood, where whenever they are faced with a situation, they are better able to cope in a highly, highly demanding environment. And I mean, it's getting that much more so, and in different areas from what you and I may have grown up with. But they're going into a world where there's so much that they're going to need to think critically about. But also, they're going to need to apply lenses that say, I understand that just because something is true for me, it's not necessarily true for someone else. And school has fallen short for a very long time when it comes to actually teaching how to think. And what you are doing for me is gold. I wish that so many more of our schools, so many more of our bodies and associations that work with organized schools and institutions were doing this kind of thing. So talk me through, as we close off the discussion, what is the big benefit of the work that you've done? What are some of and you touched on a few of them already, but what are some of the results you've seen over time, and also what's next? So that if anyone who's listening and watching goes, oh, I just need to bring Katy in, or we need to collaborate and do something, they can already start to pin themselves to something that you are looking for or what you're building right now.
So I think one of the bits of feedback that I've had is how it changes the way that students then engage with the difficult moments that inevitably will come. So that when there's whatever it is, a racial slur, instead of it being they must just be expelled, there's more an attitude of, ma'am, sir, they don't understand. They need to understand. So there's like this belief that there's a wrong perspective that needs changing, and we've got to be part of changing it, rather than shoving it under a carpet with an exclusion. Because excluding doesn't change then how we move forward. It doesn't paint a different, better future. And so for me, I think the underpinning of all of it, you mentioned earlier how corporate South Africa has been good at changing, as it were, but it's been very much about compliance. We have to. Transformation, there's like your policies, your frameworks, you've got to be compliant. And for me, that then makes us very much focused on percentages, and like the motivation is we have to. I would love for people to focus more on the justice, the inclusion and belonging. I call it the jib sail instead of the mainsail, which takes us further faster. Because that jib sail, justice, inclusion and belonging, when we focus on that, it's more about the heart, it's more about seeing people. And the motivation is that I want to be part of painting a different future. I want to be part of intentionally writing a better South Africa, which we can only do if we really are real and honest about why things are how they are related to the past, so that we can intentionally write a different future. So I think like that motivation of getting to be part of writing something better, getting to be part of truth, I want to say like truth, the truth of our history, shaping the mindsets now so that they are free to fly in terms of seeing everyone as belonging, seeing individuals. Shannon L. Alder says, your perspective on life comes from the cage you were held captive in. What if our students understood that? And so at their age, saw that actually my cage is just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger because I want to understand other views and other perspectives and not just always have to defend mine. That it's safe for my cage to become enormous.
Wow. And for me to step out as often as I can, and maybe even step into someone else's cage and then come out and just be in the open air and every now and again, because there is a bit of safety there in the cage as well, right, Katy, where the cage has been developed or we've stayed in there because it offers that protection and that shelter and that sense of identity that we spoke about earlier on. But one of the things that I really enjoy about what you said is that it's the awareness of the presence of the cage and how it's served and going, I see it. Okay, cool. And then when you move ahead, at least you've got that awareness that so many of us don't have, and especially at that early age.
Yeah. It's very exciting.
It is. You're doing such incredible work. And I can only imagine, and I invite our listeners and viewers, our unlearners, to also just think about how different your life or your journey would have been if you had been exposed to this conversation during your earlier schooling years, and how much more of an unlearner or how much more of an open-minded, self-aware individual you would have been today. But I think the thing that maybe is worth saying is that it's not necessarily too late. What we are creating already at this point in history or at this time in our global sort of timeline is the world where the young, it doesn't matter how old you are or what stage of the schooling process you're in, you can still be exposed to rather learning how to think, learning how to learn, as you know, right there next to maybe some of your content, which is pivotal as well. So it's coupling those two. Any closing thoughts as we wrap up, Katy?
Just as you said there about, content being pivotal, like this content is this is every day. And the students often comment on that, like we get to have real life conversations, they say. It's not about anything that's in a textbook or that they have to learn. It's like, this is real life conversations. Another kid said, oh, the lessons are like therapy. And like just that getting to actually share how you're seeing the world and that it's okay that we see it differently. It's just amazing.
Brilliant. And I mean, how often, unlearners, do you go onto social media and you see one of those reels or one of those memes that said, oh, another day and I haven't had to calculate, the hypotenuse or whatever it is. And you go, yeah, you learned that content, but how much really is it serving you on a day to day? And I think this conversation for me has been deeply profound, because as we go on with the rest of building the education sector, but also you and I and our learning journeys, is how do we, more than anything else, learn how to learn rather than what to learn, and maybe just coupling those two. So in your journey, whether you are now maybe starting a brand new learning journey, think about those two. And just to reiterate, 3 of the different parts of Katy's sort of setup within the curriculum that she works on that I really love. The one, safe space. Whether it's to yourself or to those that you work with, this is a space where you can be open-minded and be aware of your defenses, and that you don't have to always jump in to defend. I think that starting conversations with that invites people to open themselves up to learning. And then the second one is learning about your own identity right aside collective identity, because when we have those 2 frameworks, it's phenomenal what we can do. We own who we are, but then we also have a deeper understanding of others. And there's a respect there and an empathy as well. Then the very last one that I got out of this, just the 3 that jumped out for me, was perspectives. I think it's profound that that's a part of the journey that they get to go on, that learners, students, children get to jump into, to understand that where I'm standing and the position that I'm in means that I hold a certain perspective. And that individual, that family, that teacher is standing where they are standing, which means they have a different vantage point from which they view and interpret life. And I think that for me is what it looks like to teach thinking and not so much obedience. Katy, thank you so much for this discussion.
Thank
I really
you.
appreciate you.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.
Been such a pleasure. Thank you so much. And keep up the amazing work that you do at Thrive Together. We will definitely link to whether it's a website, social media, and anything else that you've got that our unlearners can go over and check out and see how they collaborate with you or support some of the great work that you do. But keep it up. Really good stuff.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, unlearners, it's been myself, Zanele Njapa, the unlearning lady, and today my guest was Katy Mthetwa, CEO at Thrive Together. It's been such a delicious conversation, and I'd like to invite you not to let it stop here. So go ahead, take some of the nuggets that you've got from this episode and think about how you can apply them, but not just apply them, how you can have other conversations on the back end of this, whether they're conversations with Katy or they're just conversations with the individuals, communities, groups in your life, because education is a team sport. It's about what you and I do together collectively that makes all of the difference. Thank you very much for joining this episode, and we will see you on the very next episode of the Unlearners podcast. Bye for now.
The Unlearners. Learn, change, grow. Learn, change, grow. The Unlearners. The Unlearners. The Unlearners. Learn, change, grow.